Welcome to another episode of Earth is Our Home with Dr. Thomas Blaine. Today he's going to be talking about the U.S. Army declares war on global warming, climate change. Stay tuned. Welcome back to another episode of Earth is Our Home with Dr. Thomas Blaine. Dr. Thomas Blaine is an associate professor with the Ohio State University Extension Program. And today we're going to be looking at how the report from the U.S. Army, which declares war on global warming and climate change. Tom, it's always a pleasure talking with you.
It's always great to be here, Patrick. I really love Earth is Our Home. It's a great series. You folks at OSU South Centers do a great job, and I enjoy working with you. And I think we're getting a lot of great and timely information out to the public in this series.
One of the things that I like about what you do, Tom, is that you look at relevant information as of today and how it applies both to the past and to the future. And you have a report that just came out February the 11th, 2022 from the Department of Army.
This is an extremely important report, and it's an extremely important series of actions on the part of the United States Army. This is huge that the Army is doing this, and yet it was reported in the media, but not very much. And so I would wager, if I were a betting man, that very few people among the American public know anything about this report. So we're going to try to fill them in on why this is important. This is a very comprehensive report. So what I have done is when I noticed last week it came out, and it did come out in the media, but it was kind of buried in the media. I got a hold of the report, studied it very carefully, and I've got the whole summary here. And it also includes why the Army is concerned and what the Army's doing. It's very thorough. This report is, if you remember last November, talked about the futility of just writing reports and things like that without climate action. This has climate action in it, and the Army tells us why. So if I could, I titled this is my title. This is an Army report on what the Army plans to do about global warming, their climate strategy. So I called it Army Declares War on Global Warming, Climate Change. And there's the cover, United States Army Climate Strategy. That's the cover to the report. Now, Patrick, we're going to include below our video today the link to the report so that viewers can go themselves if they want to look at the report. It's very thorough, and it can be a little bit intimidating. So I want to go through it, but I do want to have the link. And this is the cover. So the Army just released this on February 11th. And here's what they stated. The global warming, climate change is highly likely to interfere with how nations find, collect, and trade resources. And the Army believes the disruptions caused by this phenomenon will lead to increases in armed conflict globally. So that's a little bit of good news in that our Army's being proactive, a little bit of bad news in that they are predicting that there will be armed conflict as global warming proceeds and makes certain resources more scarce. Now, this plan is very aggressive. And basically, to give you two real findings here, the Army plans to cut its net greenhouse gas emissions in half, 50% reduction by 2030. Now, that's only about 8 years from now. And to cut those in half in 8 years, that's a very aggressive maneuver. You and I had talked about various targets before. and that the 2030 target was so soon, we couldn't really understand how organizations or countries could do that. But that's what the Army's wanting to do. And they want to cut net emissions all the way to zero by 2050, which is very ambitious to say the least. Now, the Army made it clear that its core purpose remains unchanged, lest anyone get upset about this. The Army's core purpose is to deploy, fight, and win the nation's wars by providing ready, prompt, and sustained land dominance as part of the joint force. And that won't change. But climate change, the Army's saying, again, these are from the report, these words, will make this mission more challenging. And the Army has to proactively reduce the risks that climate change imposes. So they came up with what are called lines of effort. By the way, this is called the ACS, Army Climate Strategy, and it advances 3 lines of effort, LOEs. Number 1 is installations. You know, the Army has a lot of installations. The Army's main installations are forts. The Marine Corps has the camps. Camp Lejeune, Camp Pivots, Camp something, that's the Marine Corps. If it's fort, that's Army. They also are talking about changing acquisition and logistics, the supply, the abilities to sustain an armed force in the field for extended period of time, and then training. So on installations, they want to enhance resilience and sustainability by adapting their infrastructure and natural environments to climate change risks, securing access to training and testing lands into the future, and mitigating greenhouse gas emissions.
But when they say greenhouse gases, define again, real quick, what those are.
A greenhouse gas is any of the gases that tends to trap heat in the atmosphere. So the sun shines toward the earth takes up a lot of the radiation, the energy from the sun, heats the surface, but much is reflected back towards space. You know, you look at the moon, it's shining, but it's not really shining. It's reflecting sunshine. And so that light just comes bouncing off. The moon doesn't have an atmosphere, so there is no greenhouse effect. But because we have an atmosphere with gases in it, and the main ones here are water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, ozone. In general, when we talk about human-induced global warming, the main greenhouse gas we're talking about is carbon dioxide, because our burning of fossil fuels has added to the concentration of CO2, about 50% more concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere than pre-industrial times. So that's what the Army's talking about. When they talk about mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, they're really primarily talking about carbon dioxide, but they're also talking about methane, CH4. Acquisition and logistics. We're talking here, the Army is about increasing operational capacity while reducing sustainment demand and strengthening climate resilience. Training is huge in the Army. That's what the Army does. I mean, fortunately, most of the time we're at peace. Most forces are at peace. They're not in combat, but they work hard every day. They get up and train. And so preparing a force that's ready to operate in a climate-altered world. You know, the conditions that we saw in the wars in the Middle East, in Iraq and Afghanistan, those conditions 30 years from now are liable to be quite different because of global warming. So here we go with LOE1 installations. And we already saw the strategic outcome, but now look at all those intermediate objectives. And I'm not going to read down through there, but I do want you to notice certain specific things. Number one, look at 1.1, install a microgrid on every installation. That's within about 13 years from now. So a lot of times, the reason why that's so important is because, you know, we're all hooked up to the grid. We hear about the grid. We generate electricity, and you and I are on the grid. Everybody's on the grid, basically. But every installation in the Army is going to have its own microgrid. That will allow them to generate electricity locally. And we're talking about, on the second one, on-site carbon pollution-free power generation by 2040. So they've only got a 5-year window from getting the grid set up to having this operational. Now that's very aggressive. That's 18 years. If you go down through there, you see certain keys. You see electric. Look at 1.7, all electric light duty, non-tactical vehicle fleet. Okay. Look at 1.5, reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. These are very specific. That's what is so impressive about this report. You know, I've criticized reports and things before, but not this one, because this has specific actions, specific timetables, and it has it for each one of the lines of effort, LOEs. Here's the one for acquisition and logistics. Again, look at 2.1, electrification. Look at 2.2, electric tactical vehicles. Go down through there and have a look at a lot of the key words. And of course, you can pause this video and study this if you would like. Look at 2.10, net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. LOE number 3, training. To get 2024, 2 years from now. Publish climate change lessons and best practices. That's for training, so that these new soldiers and officers coming in will enter into a new army, an army where this is already a priority. They're focusing on their people here in this LOE. 3.3, we have an ambitious goal. Look at 3.4. You're talking about 2028. All Army operational and strategic exercises and simulation consider climate change risks and threats. All right. So when we look down there, look at 3.6, reduce direct greenhouse gas emissions. So when you look at this, Patrick, if you recall, in November, I gave a presentation on what we have to do if we're going to be serious about preventing catastrophic global warming down the road. What do we have to do? I gave you two-word phrases, and you can go back and look at that one. That was in the November. It was when I summarized the Scotland World Conference where the world leaders came together, and I was telling you that was a failure. That meeting was a failure. All the international meetings were failures. This Army plan looks very ambitious, and I hope it works. It doesn't look to me like they're set up for failure. But they are doing those two-word things that are absolutely permeating. As you go back through there, 3.6, you see reduce emissions. You go back through here, you don't have to 2.10, net zero emissions. 2.1, electrification technologies. 2.3, fully electric tactical vehicles. Again, you keep reading down through here on these LOEs, and you constantly see 1.7, all electric light duty non-tactical vehicle fleet. 1.8, all electric non-tactical vehicle fleet by 2035. Different kinds of vehicles. They have timetables for those. So they're talking about basically what I suggested that we have to do. They're electrifying everything. As you read through these LOEs, they're electrifying everything, starting out with installing a microgrid. And then the other thing you see, 1.5 reduction in emissions. You see this throughout. Reduce emissions, electrification. Almost like they saw my report, because it's through these two activities, electrifying everything, doing away with, gasoline and diesel and all these fossil fuels. But even when we go to electrification, we're not talking about getting it through coal burning power plants and other fossil fuel activities. We're talking about reducing emissions, which means going to some other energy source. So this looks like a sound plan to me as I read through the report. I was very impressed by this report. In a way, I'm not surprised. I think it's sad that the media didn't play it up more, but I've told you before, I've already cautioned you, if you're getting your information on global climate change from the media, you're in the wrong place. Come to the Ohio State University and the resources we offer. I'm in outreach. I'm with Extension. We offer me to make presentations to you. Watch Earth is Our Home. You can contact me, but I'm not surprised that the military has done this, because our military is the finest in the world. And there's no question about that. And it's often been at the forefront of all kinds of technological change. So I was very encouraged by this report. You remember I've told you many times before that individuals can't do much about global warming. If you put a solar panel on your house, you buy a more fuel efficient car, you're still engulfed in a system that we've configured around burning fossil fuels to generate our energy. And we have to change the system in order to meet this challenge. And the Army is a massive institution, one of the most important institutions we have in the United States. They use a lot of energy. And so when the U.S. Army wants to make a wholesale change like this, it's not the same thing as you or me saying, well, we're going to insulate our house. I'm not saying those things are bad. I'm saying they can't have an impact. We have to reconfigure the system. And that's exactly what the Army is planning on doing, reconfiguring their system.
Hey, Tom, here's the skepticism that I come in. We've had so many different reports, so many different plans, so many different goals. When you look at some of the recent conferences, basically you had a lot of plans to lessen greenhouse gases and 5 years, 10 years, 15 years ago, and we've never made it. And so I can see where you're saying that the Army is technically advanced, but they are also run by individuals that change directions based upon administration. And I'd just like for you to
Yes.
help me better understand why their stepping in is going to make a major difference.
Well, I think that it's important because I think the Army leadership has been very forthright with the political leadership that in a climate changed world, we're going to have to change the way we operate because our goal is to protect the United States. It's the Department of Defense, after all. And, the kind of warfare that we might be fighting 30, 40 years from now, we all pray for peace, but we prepare for war because we never know when that's coming down the road. The Army leaders realize that the earth is changing, and the kind of Army that we have today, which is the very best in the world, may be antiquated by 2050. But we're still going to be needing to have the Army. And so I think this report has teeth in it because it's got those very specific goals they have in the report, how they intend to proceed. I encourage people to look at the report. And, I'm encouraged by it because the Army is such a large organization. And when we talk about carbon footprints and things like that, individual carbon footprints are relatively small. We have to change the system. And the Army is a very large system. I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know if all these things will come to pass, but seeing what they have on there indicates to me they're very, very serious about it. Yes, it's true. The president is the commander in chief. I don't know to what extent administrations matter on proceeding with this plan. However, the president of the United States, Secretary of Defense, yes, they change with, at elections and everything like that. Secretary of the Army even will be changed as you get a new president. But once you have something moving like this in a momentum, the people who make a lot of the decisions, the Joint Chiefs of Staff and so forth, even though, yes, of course, they're under the jurisdiction of elected officials, I'm encouraged that this can gain momentum and will make a difference.
I do hope that you are correct. That is a better understanding, from the skepticism that I have. And I guess you have to be positive when it comes to, can we work through the global warming, the climate changes? And it sounds like you're finding some of those areas that it will happen.
Well, I just mainly wanted to give this report because my job at Earth is Our Home is to educate the public. Here we've been doing the series, and I try to keep people up with the latest. So when I saw this report come out, I realized that I couldn't pass it by and not include a presentation on it on Earth is Our Home. I owe it to the public to make this, make the public aware of this initiative.
We'll have below where individuals can find that report on the internet. We're talking with Dr. Thomas Blaine. He's an associate professor with the Ohio State University Extension Program. Tom, thank you again for all of your information and insights.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. I enjoyed it.